We are now officially 3 months into the year, and I'm going to do my first quarter reading wrap up. So I have read 18 books from January the 1st through to the end of March. And let's talk about them because it's such a wide mixture. We've got some absolute 5 stars in here. I had a couple of really, really good reading months, but then there's also some 1 stars and some 1.5 stars. So I have been just a little bit brutal. So my first finish read of the year was It Girl by Ruth Ware. This is a thriller. It is set around two girls that meet at university at Oxford. And I went into this with really, really high hopes. I'd never ever read a Ruth Ware before, and it's a thriller. I love thrillers as a general rule. But this I actually rated 1.5 stars. It was so boring. It felt so pointless. It just didn't go anywhere and it didn't reach anything for me. And the synopsis sounded so brilliant. I genuinely thought I was going to fall in love with it, when it just fell so beyond flat. It was actually really quite unbelievable. It kind of had a bit of a plot twist at the end, but it still wasn't like, oh my god, plot twist. And it just dragged and dragged and dragged. And one of the main characters that we spoke about, April, was just so dislikable, and the other character was just not likable either. I just could not connect with this book whatsoever. Next up, I went into a 5-star read, and that was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I don't actually have my copy because I lent it out to my mum, which I never do, but I had a feeling that she would actually really like this book. I have never ever read a Taylor Jenkins read. Evelyn Hugo was my first. At first, I was a little bit kind of, where's this going? What's happening? And then as the story developed and as we learn about Evelyn herself, and I'm going to try and not put any spoilers in any of this, but I never realised that this book had such huge sapphic representation, and I absolutely loved that. As a gay woman, it was so profound. It dealt with some really sensitive subjects, so whether that was from sexuality, racism, sexism, it dealt with domestic violence. It was just so well written, and the pace was really lovely. There was a bit of a dull bit in the middle, but all in all, I absolutely fell in love with this book, and I rated it a 5-star. It came so highly for me. We then have Really Good Actually, which I renamed Really Meh, actually. So this was a 1-star for me. And I know that sounds really brutal, but when I saw the cover, I was like, that looks absolutely brilliant. When I saw what it was about, we follow a woman that is going through divorce. Absolutely great. Loved it. Felt like there might be something in there that I could relate to. Whereas in actual fact, there was no plot. It felt like there was no point. The main character was so dislikable, so whiny. It was unbelievable. And it really genuinely felt like it was trying to be something. It was trying to be funny. It was trying to be relevant. And it just completely missed the mark for me. It was a book that, looking back, I wish I had just DNF'd and I didn't push myself through, because I didn't enjoy this whatsoever. My next book of the year was Eye for an Eye by MJ Arledge. This book is absolutely fantastic, and it is one that I continually recommend for anybody that is wanting a thriller. It isn't necessarily fast paced. There is a lot of information to take in. There's a lot of different characters that we meet, but I rated this a 5-star. So Eye for an Eye is following criminals across the UK, and it's a very small amount of criminals who have obviously committed some of the very worst crimes, but then they're given new identities and new lives, and they're allowed out, and nobody knows who they are. And the reason this struck such a chord with me is because it's real. There are people genuinely living among us like that, and we have no idea. And it kind of really settled in my head. I was like, what would happen if people found out? What would happen if those people suddenly information became who they were actually really are? And then what would we do? It was just such a good book. There's a lot of trigger warnings in this. There are bits that are a really tough read and make you feel very uncomfortable. but not in necessarily a negative way. I just think Jay Arledge absolutely nailed it with this book. It came out on top for me. I adored it, and I actually really like their writing style as an author. So this is an author that I'm going to be keeping my eyes on going forward. I then have my very first DNF of 2024. So this is A Game of Hearts and Heists by Ruby Rowe. I DNF'd this on page 50. Now, this was kindly sent to me by the author themselves. I know that they're an independent author, and I know they're indie, and I think that's fantastic. I know it comes from a series. It's a sapphic, dark romantasy. Now, the reason that I DNF'd this was there's a variety of reasons. I'm never ever going to lie to you guys. I'm always going to be honest with you. Firstly, the writing style felt quite immature. I didn't really connect with it. I didn't really like it. It kind of felt like it was a bit underdeveloped and a bit unpolished. Secondly, from the sapphic aspect, I personally felt like it really fetishized gay women, and I didn't like that. There were some of the scenes in here, and I understand it's a fantasy, I understand it's a romantasy, but there were some of the scenes in there and I just thought that just feels almost quite like pornish, and it made me feel a bit, and I didn't enjoy reading them, which was a shame because I was really looking forward to reading a sapphic romance and finding something that was relatable, and for me that it just wasn't. And then what sealed the deal, and although I didn't get to this part, by that point I just had enough. I wasn't excited to pick it up and it wasn't really doing anything for me. But I did read on Goodreads by a couple of people that there is some ableist language in here, and that just put me off entirely. So again, this is quite a loved series. People do really, really like this, and I love that for them. But for me, unfortunately, it was a DNF. I just didn't enjoy it. My next book was The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. This book I got on Kindle Unlimited, and I didn't expect anything from it. It was almost like DNFing the last book, A Game of Hearts and Heists, put me into a bit of a slump, and I was just looking for a bit of an easy read. Little did I know this book would rock my world, and I fell in love with it. So again, this was a 5-star for me, and I so didn't expect it, but it's just such a beautiful, beautiful story. It follows a older man who has lost his wife. She's passed away, and she had a love for reading. And he joins a local library and somehow strikes this connection with the librarian, who's a younger girl. She's going through her own troubles herself. And there's a reading list, and this reading list just manages to connect loads of people. And essentially it is the story of how books create connections, and how we learn from books, and books can almost soothe your soul. So it really is just a beautiful, beautiful little story. I think some people have read it and not got the same thing from it that I did, but at the time of reading, I just absolutely loved this, and it's just such a stunning, stunning little read. I then went into my first fantasy, and of course it was Fourth Wing. Now, I have never ever been a fantasy reader. I don't think I ever will be a fantasy reader, but I did want to try, obviously, the viral book, and I enjoyed it. I didn't expect to enjoy it, but I did. I didn't absolutely love it. It didn't blow my little world, but I did rate it a 4-star, because for me, sometimes it doesn't have to be the best book in the world. It doesn't have to be the best written book in the world. I just need to enjoy it. And I definitely did enjoy this. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the world. I found it really easy to read. I found it easy to understand. And all in all, it was just a real feel-good book. I fell in love with the dragons, and I did not expect to whatsoever. A bit of a weird change. I went from Fourth Wing into Haunting Adeline. So this was my first dark romance. I only read this because of what I had seen on social media, and I was like, I want to see if it is as bad as people are saying. Now, the list of trigger warnings that comes with this book is pretty heavy. It is very, very heavy, and it's not a book that you should just go into without reading those warnings. However, I surprisingly really did. I liked this. I did enjoy it. I know it glorifies certain things, and I know that it almost tries to make certain really horrible negative things. But I do think, to be honest, that is the premises of a dark romance in many senses. It's not going to be light, it's not going to be fluffy, it's definitely not going to be mainstream. The backstory itself of Haunting Adeline, I really liked, and I really liked the characters. I really did enjoy them. I actually got my wife reading this book, and it was the first book she's ever completed. So, yeah, Haunting Adeline for me comes out at around a 3.5, 4 star even. I loved it. I've not yet read Hunting, but I do have it, and I do also have both of the novellas. I've just not got around to reading them yet. I then had like a cute little stopgap with We All Want Impossible Things by Catherine Newman. Now, this was a teeny tiny little book that really did actually pack a punch. We follow two best friends, one of whom is in a hospice and she's at the end of her life. And it's kind of that relationship of losing your very, very best friend and how one person can tie so many people together. It is such a lovely, lovely little read. It's quite heartbreaking in moments, and it does come out to be actually quite sad. For a little book, I thought I'd eat through this really quickly. I actually didn't. It took me about 3 days to read it because there were parts that kind of personally quite heavily, possibly because of things that my family have been through. But it's just a really, really cute little read. I rated this a 3 stars for me, simply because I would have liked a bit more of a story, and I would have liked a bit more of a bigger book. Small books normally don't catch my heart, but it's a nice little kind of read, like a bit of a sorbet. Next up is Iron Flame. Now, considering I adored Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, I could not stand. I hated this book, and I know it's got a lot of criticism. You can 100% tell that Rebecca Yarros just pushed this out. It is a big book as well. So we are talking a heavy amount of pages. We've got 623 pages. I think the word count in here is quite high as well. I rated this a 3 star. A lot of it was just info dumping. A lot of it was repetitive. The characters that I actually loved so heavily in Fourth Wing started to grate on me in this book. They just kept doing the same thing over and over. They were arguing about the same thing over and over. A lot of people were shocked by the ending, but it left me just thinking, what the fuck? Just nothing tied in for me. I found this actually quite an unenjoyable reading experience, and it was one that I was just pushing to get through, and I wanted it over, which is such a shame. And I know that a lot of people are asking me if I'm going to be reading the next one. I can't remember what it's called fully, Onyx something, and I genuinely don't know. I think Iron Flame in many senses was potentially enough to put me off. I read my first Frida, so I have The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. Now, there's a lot of opinions on Frida as an author. I generally don't know enough to express my opinion. However, what I will say is I don't fully understand all of the Frida hype. For me, this hit maybe a 3 star. It was okay. I read it very quickly. It is very, very fast paced. I think if you're relatively new to thriller genres, or if you're new to reading as a whole, it would suit. However, for a seasoned reader, I don't think there was enough. There was not enough depth to the story. It just felt like quite a quickly written, fast-paced thriller. It was just okay. It's not for me to want to pick up another Frida book, let's put it that way. So after Haunting Adeline, I was like, okay, let me try another dark romance. And unfortunately, it resulted in my second DNF of the year. So we have The Den of Vipers by K.A. Knight. No, absolutely no. I really tried to push through this. I really tried to love it. And unfortunately, it is so awfully written. It is graphic in ways that just weren't nice at all. And I was like, apart from the constant sex scenes, what is the plot? Is there a plot here? And I think I liked Haunting Adeline so much because there was a plot. So it wasn't just like banging. Whereas this, it just didn't exist. I got really bored, and the frequent use of some of the words, like the P word, I'm sure there was mound in here as well. It was just too much. So unfortunately, no, this was a big no-no, and it was an immediate DNF. I have another 5 star. straight after that one though, which was The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeill. Now this is a historical fiction. I love historical fiction as a genre anyway, and I actually got this from a charity shop. I didn't buy this brand new. But it's set in 1850 London. We're following Iris, who works in a doll factory. She desperately wants to become an artist. There is a certain somebody that becomes a little bit obsessed with her, and it is just such a good book. I know this has actually been turned into a TV series, but I haven't watched it simply because I do find they normally ruin the book for me. But this was a 5-star. I loved it. I absolutely adored this book. It was so good. It was delightful. It was just twisty and turny towards the end. And I actually thought the main character, Iris, was such a good advocate for women at the time and for just fighting for who she was and what she believed in. I loved it. I then have another Kindle read, which was The Last List of Mabel Beaumont by Laura Pearson. And again, this was an unexpected book. I so did not expect anything from this, to the point where I almost wasn't going to read it. And wow, it is incredible. So I rated this at a 4-star. It actually has a very sapphic based story, and I wasn't expecting that. I had no idea from the synopsis that existed, and this is almost the reason that I didn't rate it higher than a 4-star. I wish that sapphic story was more prominent before you read the book, because it was so well written, it was so well done, and it was so lovely. You met such a whole host of people. It was just a really, really nice read that kind of really got me thinking, actually. And at first, Mabel's a really dislikable character. I got a bit aggravated with her. She was annoying me. But in the end, I fell in love with her. I thought she was absolutely great. So we kind of, from the loss of her husband, and he always wrote lists, and he left her a list, and she needs to complete this list. But it actually, in turn, unfolds her life and the things that Mabel wishes she had done, and she is now doing. So it is a really, really beautiful, beautiful little read if you get the time to read it. I just wish this had been marketed better as a more sapphic lined story. I entered the fantasy world again with Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So this is a bit of a dark academia, following a young girl called Alex around Yale. And for me, this was the weirdest read. If you're on my book talk, you would have seen me moaning my ass off about this book. I was really not enjoying it. I really wanted to finish it, but I'd got too far. I'd hit that committal point where I couldn't DNF. And in a way, thank God I didn't DNF, because the ending was incredible. I fell in love with the ending of this book. It completely changed my entire perspective. I actually ended up rating it around a 3.5, verging on a 4-star, simply just because of that ending. But there was a lot of this book where I was confused. I think it's a magic system, but I didn't understand the magic system. There was a lot of bits that were happening that were like, I don't understand, that doesn't make sense. There almost wasn't enough world building, and there was a lot of guesswork. So I'm glad that I've read it, because it leads me into Hellbent, which apparently has got incredible reviews, and I am looking forward to reading. But Ninth House was a really weird, hard read for me. It was my first dip into dark academia, and it's potential that the genre is maybe just not for me. We'll soon find out. But yeah, it was a funny one for sure. I had Spy Hopes on Notes on an Execution by Dania Kafka. It was a good book. It came out 3.5 stars. Now, I did think it was going to come out higher, especially because this book actually has a lot of positive praise. And it's not that the book is bad at all. So essentially, it's following a man in his final 12 hours on death row. And what the author wanted to achieve, I didn't get. So the point is that it's actually the story of the woman that survived him and not his story. However, I found some of the women really quite insufferable and really kind of engrossed with their story. But every time we met him, so we met Ansel, the man on death row, I was like, give me more. And I was so intrigued by him, by his story, how he was feeling. And it was so smartly written, actually, when it came to his parts of the books. I felt like I was him. I felt like it was me that was going down to the gurney. It was me that was laying on the table. So for me, the way the author wanted it to be perceived by the reader just missed the mark. And I actually found myself more interested in Ansel than I did female victims. unfortunately. So that's why it ranked a little bit lower in ratings for me, because I took from it something completely different to what the author intended. And I do think it could have been slightly better written. Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield was a 5-star for me. Now, I don't annotate books. I'm not an annotator, but the volume that I have annotated this to the point where I have got little sticky notes dotted around the book, I fell in love with it. It is a very, very weird book. It's very much a weird girl book, to be fair. It's quite speculative. There is a plot, but the plot doesn't really sum up to anything. And the ending, I think, is very much take what you want from it. I do think that this is very, very smartly written. I adored this book, and it's one that's actually probably really going to sit with me for a long time. I think about it on and off. If you have a fear of water, which I do, or a fear of being submerged, or a fear of drowning, then there is a chance that you may read this as a bit of a thriller, and it is going to make you feel uncomfortable at parts. It definitely made me feel uncomfortable in parts. So please do be aware of that going into it. And the final book of the quarter is fucking awful. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a book that is all over social media, heavily on TikTok. I saw it ages ago and I just thought, oh my God, the premises of that sounds so lovely. It sounds so beautiful. I really wanted to pick it up. So essentially, it's about a little coffee shop in Japan, and you go to this coffee shop and you can go back in time, but you have to drink the coffee before it gets cold. So it's like a special cup of coffee that takes you back in time. Oh, sounds like such a lovely little book, and it is a Japanese translation. I do wonder actually potentially if some things did genuinely get lost in translation with this book, because some of the characters were just horrendous. Actually, most of the characters were horrendous. They didn't really have any depth. They didn't have a character. Some of them were just whiny and awful. There was no point to the book. It felt like I kept reading like books within a book. It was all different stories, but they all merged together. And I got to the end and I was like, I could have easily just read the last chapter and not read the rest of the book, and it wouldn't have mattered. That's how vague it all felt. It just really didn't sink well. I didn't enjoy it. And it's unfortunate because I really wanted to enjoy it, but it just didn't have enough depth to it for me. So I've actually got the second one in the series. I know there's 4. I don't fucking know how there's 4 of them. I don't know if I will ever read the second one. I do think this is actually going to end up being one of those books that I unhaul. I was really sad for it because I was so excited. I just thought it sounded like such a beautiful little story to read, and it fell completely fucking flat. So there we are. That is all of the books that I have read in my first quarter of 2024. I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that gave you a little bit of context to the styles that I read. I feel like I'm quite varied in my genres. I'm always open to trying new genres. There's one that I definitely don't like, and you've probably picked up on that, and that is just general romance. I think a lot of that is the fact to do that I'm gay, and I really struggle to relate to them. But yeah, I see you for my quarter 2 wrap up. I actually set a reading goal at the start of this year for 2024 to be 40 books. I'm now 22 books in, so I'm definitely going to surpass that. I'm definitely going to smash it. But is any in here that you've read, you've loved, you've had a completely different experience with, please let me know, because I love that. And as always, remember that my opinions, my reading thoughts are subjective to me. Please use your own judgment when you're going into books, because we may not necessarily all feel the same.